areas are pursuing such cooperation in the fight against climate change in support of states' measures to halt and adapt to destructive trends. Today's side event will showcase examples of this work. We will hear from representatives of several UN Oceans members, including in conversation with relevant stakeholders. This will provide insights into how UN Oceans members have responded to the needs through collaborative ocean-related projects, with an emphasis on how joint action has contributed to increased ambition for ocean-based mitigation and adaptation. The event aims to bring to the forefront efforts in support of the worst affected communities, in particular small island developing states, by highlighting coordination for greater ocean-based climate change ambition for these communities. Before I conclude, I wish to underline relevant activities underway in my office. A milestone for international cooperation and coordination, the agreement under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, the BBNJ agreement, was adopted in June this year. The agreement addresses inter alia the impacts of climate change on marine biological diversity beyond national jurisdiction. The Division for Ocean Affairs and the Law of the Sea in my office serves as interim secretariat for the agreement, and we will collaborate with relevant UN systems organizations to promote a better understanding of the agreement and prepare for its entry into force. To this end, capacity building and awareness-raising activities are underway. The main outcome of the regular process for global reporting and assessment of the state of the marine environment, including socio-economic aspects, the World Ocean Assessments, are the result of a massive international collaboration effort amongst United Nations system organizations and national experts from all regions. These assessments provide a scientific basis for policy making, including on the interface between the ocean and climate change. Finally, a number of capacity-building activities addressing various aspects of ocean governance, including those related to climate change, are being implemented in collaboration with donors, academia, United Nations organizations, local communities, and other stakeholders. In the words of the United Nations Secretary-General, we have now left the era of global warming and entered the era of global boiling. In just the last 12 months, climate change has contributed to extreme weather events that have wreaked havoc across the globe. Every continent has been affected. Ocean temperatures are higher than ever before. We must act collectively, and we must act now to do more to tackle this crisis. The United Nations system, including members of United Nations Oceans, are here to support global efforts. We invite all stakeholders to support and engage with us so that we can work together to do our part in this climate emergency. Thank you.
We'd like to thank Mr. Miguel Soares for those opening remarks. Talofa, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Gemma. I am a Pacific Islander. I am a SIDS member. I am here today to moderate our discussion. I'm very privileged and honored to have to be invited to do so. As a Pacific Islander and as an early career ocean professional, also as a woman, I am excited to take part in this important discussion to shed light on the important work that's being undertaken by the UN Oceans, a coordinating mechanism established by the UNGA, and how it works to coordinate the various UN bodies and the work that they're undertaking in ocean action that contributes to climate action. At this COP28, we have the benefit of the first GST report, the 5-year checkpoint to answer where we are in relation to the 3 pillars of the Paris Agreement: adaptation, mitigation, and means of implementation. The ocean covers 71% of the Earth's surface, provides 95% of habitable space for biodiversity, and is a life support system for the planet. It provides key services, food, and goods that we as humans rely on. For SIDS, the ocean is even more crucial to our lives and livelihoods. Fisheries are the lifeblood of our economies. Coral reefs provide sustenance, safety from storm surges, and habitat for continued services. Climate change is slowly but surely eroding the ability of the ocean to provide these services. Against this backdrop, and with the first GST report in hand, it is fitting to have this conversation at COP28 to discuss with key stakeholders and UN bodies their work on ocean action and how this contributes to climate change for all of us. Without further ado, I now invite our keynote address from Mr. Neil O'Dea. Please, sir, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for the warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be with you all. I'm Niall O'Dea, and I'm the Senior Assistant Deputy Minister of Strategic Policy for Fisheries and Oceans Canada. But here before you today because I'm the co-facilitator for this biennium of the Ocean Climate Change Dialogue under the UNFCCC process. It's notable that there's an increasing recognition not just of the impact of climate change on the ocean, but also that the ocean is a place where urgent climate action is needed and can provide significant positive potential. Parties to the UNFCCC have recognized the importance of protecting the ocean and its ecosystems, both under the UNFCCC framework and in the preamble to the Paris Agreement. Further, the Convention commits the parties to cooperate in the conservation and enhancement of oceans. The Ocean and Climate Change Dialogue in 2023 was aimed at strengthening ocean climate action at the national level and under the UNFCCC process, and focused on the topics of ecosystem-based restoration, including blue carbon, and on aquatic foods. More than 250 positive case examples were submitted by parties and stakeholders that provide really concrete practical solutions and recommendations to parties for developing national climate action and goals at the climate-ocean biodiversity nexus. In the key messages to COP28, the Ocean Dialogue emphasized that parties must commit to mainstreaming ocean-based action in national action and UNFCCC processes, including in the global stocktake outcomes, the GGA, and its financial mechanisms. The global stocktake outcomes at COP could lead to the establishment of guidelines for parties to be able to include and strengthen ocean-based measures in their updated NDCs and national strategies. Additionally, parties were encouraged to implement the ocean-related mandates from COP26 and COP27/CMA4, recognizing the role of coastal blue carbon ecosystems and aquatic food for mitigation and adaptation purposes. Julio Cardano and I are the co-facilitators of the dialogue. In our letter as co-facilitators of the dialogue to the SBI and SBSTA chairs on the elements for consideration of the GST outputs component towards GST1 CMA5, we encouraged all parties to incorporate more blue in their climate commitments and urged the ocean to be placed within the GST outcomes. We further emphasized that enhancing international cooperation for ocean-based climate action is necessary if we are to achieve our climate change goals. In the 2023 synthesis report on the GST elements prepared by the UNFCCC Secretariat, ocean-related submissions from parties and non-party stakeholders constitute almost half of total submissions. And in this respect, I would like to thank the UN Oceans members for their submissions to the GST. Submissions have recognized and welcomed the work of the Ocean Climate Dialogue and reiterated the invitation in the Decision 1/CP-26, paragraph 60, to integrate and strengthen ocean-based action. The ocean offers a space for integrated solutions that can be reflected in national climate policies and strategies. As reported in the 2023 NDC's synthesis document prepared by the UNFCCC Secretariat, new or updated NDCs reflected a significantly increased recognition of the ocean's role in strengthening climate action. A key message that emerges is that parties are encouraged to continue strengthening ocean-based measures in their updated NAPs on the basis of the best available science. Beyond the UNFCCC, several other processes within the UN are advancing ocean-based climate action, whilst highlighting the urgency for strengthening interagency cooperation. Sustainable Development Goal 14 is dedicated to the conservation and sustainable use of the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. And in its most recent resolution on the oceans and the law of the sea, the General Assembly specified that the current and projected adverse effects of climate change on the marine environment and marine biodiversity, including rising seawater temperature, ocean deoxygenation, sea level rise, and ocean acidification, and highlighted the importance of preserving the ocean as a carbon sink. In the sphere of biodiversity, as noted by Mr. Soares, the recently adopted BNNJ Treaty promotes holistic ocean governance and the protection and sustainable use of marine biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, thereby enhancing resilience to the impacts of climate change and preserving carbon sink functions of the ocean. Meanwhile, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework similarly provides an opportunity to link the conservation of marine and coastal ecosystems with climate change mitigation and adaptation at the international level. And I'm sure Dr. Cooper will tell us more about that. The United Nations Environment Programme is also tackling the issue of climate change and its impacts on the ocean by supporting member states in their transition to a sustainable blue economy, ocean governance, and building institutional capacities. FAO has been actively supporting countries and communities in building the resilience of aquatic food systems to climate change through the Committee on Fisheries. The London Convention and the London Protocol Treaty regime addresses climate change mitigation technologies by ensuring that they are regulated responsibly to protect the marine environment. As co-facilitators of the mandated Ocean and Climate Change Dialogue 2023, we had the opportunity to consult parties and observers to identify the dialogue topics and the cross-cutting issues that we would touch upon. Optimizing institutional connections across international policy processes and support, as well as across the UN and other international agendas, emerged as a top priority issue, featured in 79% of the total submissions received during the informal consultations. In the information note that we as co-facilitators prepared for the dialogue, several UN Oceans members contributed to the ocean updates under the UN system, clearly demonstrating the need to strengthen synergies and interlinkages to deliver on the mandates for parties as one UN. The Ocean Dialogue gave voice to UN representatives who are spearheading the global agenda on the dialogue topics, linking it to other international agendas and instruments, such as the relevant work under UNCLOS, UNEP, the UN Decade on Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, and the promotion of the Blue Transformation and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, as well as representatives from constituted bodies and the finance community. A key message that emerged from the dialogue was that their institutional linkages must be strengthened between parties at a national and international levels and across UN mandates and processes such as the international legally binding instrument under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea for the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity beyond national jurisdiction, or the BBNJ, as well as in the Kunming-Montreal GBF, to enhance global ambition and action for a climate-resilient ocean. The interconnectedness of the ocean demands an integrated approach, one that recognizes the ocean's pivotal role in addressing climate change. It's clear that ramping up ocean-related collaboration within the UN system through that interagency coordination can support parties in strengthening ocean-based climate action. UN Oceans entities are working across these international processes and coordinating efforts together to build synergies and opportunities for climate-smart, ecosystem-focused, sustainable ocean planning. I commend the work of the UN Oceans members in assisting parties and the wider ocean community to harness the potential of the ocean to amplify ambition and action in the fight against climate change. As co-facilitator of the Ocean and Climate Dialogue, I'm committed to support parties in their calls to strengthen ocean action under the UNFCCC process and to enhance our coordination across these UNFCCC processes. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Mr. O'Day. Colleagues, before we begin, I just want to give you an overall format of our discussions today. We will have 3 panels. Firstly, our high-level panel, followed by our 2 technical panel conversations. We now open the floor for our high-level panel, and you will understand if our excellencies have other engagements to attend, so they will leave straight after. Firstly, I'd like to call on Mr. Vladimir Ryabanin, the Executive Secretary, IOC of UNESCO. Please, sir, the floor is yours.
Many thanks for giving me the floor, Madam Chair. So I would like to say, first of all, good morning, and this is my last address to you because I'm going to retire. I would like to announce that my replacement is Vidar Helgesen, who is going to start the work as Executive Secretary of IOC on the 1st of March 2024. So, and this, I think, this unique situation allows me to take you back to 2015. This is where I started my work in IOC, but this was also the COP number 21 in Paris. And that was a difficult COP, but this was the first COP that actually put the ocean on the preamble of the Paris Agreement. That was a big step forward. And I think it was to some extent also stimulated by science, because at the time there was a big discussion about the hiatus on climate change, and it was actually the science, I would say, illuminated by Argo buoys that showed that there was no hiatus, it was just redistribution of heat inside the ocean. So ocean is actually telling us now to speed up what we do, because 2023 is the warmest year, and actually, you know, because of El Nino, the difference between the current curve of the average temperature in the middle latitudes and the cloud of other curves is 0.4 degrees. This is, come on, this is 40% of the target that we're trying not to cross. So Niall already spoke about the Ocean and Climate Dialogue. I think we are firmly now on the UNFCCC agenda. This is good. We need more contributions, national determined contributions. I would like also to say that, of course, indeed, ocean is a source of solutions, and also ocean is the victim of climate change. And we have to organize our work in so many niches. Just to give you biodiversity, we have fisheries, ocean health, warming, culture, disaster risk reduction, deoxygenation, acidification. Well, you know, there are so many things, how to organize ourselves. So sustainable ocean planning is for us the way forward that is based on science that will be contributing to so many aspects of the ocean management. Then, of course, mitigation. Mitigation is also quite a big area. So, first of all, greening of industry. Carbon balance is going to change because of the warming of the ocean. And when I look at the current anomalies of temperature, I see they're mostly in the domains when ocean was absorbing carbon. So ocean carbon sink is going to change. And this may actually overturn stocktake that we are considering this time. Blue carbon, and of course carbon dioxide also. First of all, it was called reduction, now it's called even removal. So that is now looming in the agenda. We need to think about sea level rise. Because, you know, in the United Nations, there is no framework, serious framework for addressing sea level rise. There are elements of science focusing on the regional issues, but the overall framework, despite there was even a meeting of the Security Council on this topic, there is nothing. And of course, all of this is based on science. I'd like to, of course, congratulate my team for moving the decade forward. The decade is now the largest undertaking, the United Nations Decade of Science for Sustainable Development that Niall pronounced, so I didn't want to repeat, but no, I did. So now I'm going to sign several more programs in terms of approval, and we are going to have more than 50 programs of the decade. And you know, this is, despite it is the largest undertaking, we also need to think how all comes together. together. So in that sense, I would like you to be ready to learn more about the progress of the decade through the vision 2030. We are going to analyze how the decade is moving forward on the 10-decade challenges, including number 5, Ocean Climate Nexus. And this vision papers, they will be also analyzed. There will be more even general paper showing what we can do to enable the science to enable also sustainable ocean management. All these discussions will be culminating in the Barcelona conference, the second decade conference in April, and this will be a big milestone in actually driving the science forward. And this is a contribution to United Nations processes, because then there will be One Ocean Science Congress just before the Nice Conference on the Ocean in 2025. And you know, basically, I actually urge you all to work on the common plan for working in the ocean. You know, I already said it several times, so I ask you to forgive me, those who have heard it. But you know, ocean is a sick patient. There are many good doctors treating the ocean. We need to cure the patient rather than to treat the disease. And this requires, for me, I think, a plan of activities in the ocean. So the conclusion from the 9 years of service is basically, you know, and this is a very serious conclusion. Ladies and gentlemen, we can save the ocean. You know, this is not only kind of conduct meetings, be successful, report. We can really save the ocean on the basis of science, with contributions to climate issues, biodiversity, economy, well-being of people. I can continue the list if we have a good plan that is based on science. So the plan does not exist, unfortunately, and I think we have to really create it. So I basically would like to express a commitment of IC to continue serving as the coordinator of ocean sciences in the United Nations system, also through the decade, and hopefully on the basis of the science that we need, we will create the ocean that we want, but that actually requires the plan. So that's my message before I retire. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Riobanen. And while we are very sad to see you go, we understand that your successor will have very big shoes to fill. I now hand the floor to Mr. David Cooper, the Acting Executive Secretary of CBD.
Thank you very much. Is this working? Yeah. So thanks to UN Oceans for inviting me, the Convention on Biological Diversity, to this event. It's good to be here on this panel. Thank you to Vladimir for his long service and contribution to this agenda and to the cooperation also that we've had with CBD. It's really good to see the increased attention at the UN climate conferences on the oceans, starting really given momentum by that inclusion in the Paris Agreement. Oceans absorb almost half of the CO2. They're protecting us from what would otherwise be much greater temperature increases, but they're also, of course, heating themselves. So this is dampening the impacts of climate change on us, but it's not without consequences. It's not without very serious consequences, including the increased extreme events that people face, changes in biodiversity, changes in the distribution of species, including fish and fisheries, which obviously have huge impacts on people, on food security and on livelihoods, and of course increased ocean acidification. And many ecosystems in the oceans are, in fact, we could say, I think, the coral reef ecosystems in the oceans are the most vulnerable from climate change, and where the difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees is just huge. Even at 1.5 degrees, coral reefs in many parts of the world are going to struggle to survive. At 2 degrees or above 2 degrees, it's it seems like game over. The difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees is enormous for biodiversity when we think of how important some of these ecosystems are for biodiversity itself, for fisheries, therefore for livelihoods, for coastal protection. And this, these negative impacts, the loss of coral reefs, the other impacts affect everyone. They affect, of course, the coastal communities first, the most vulnerable first, but ultimately they affect everyone. Of course, coral reefs and other ecosystems are under threat from other drivers as well, from pollution, from overfishing, from destructive fishing practices, from invasive alien species, and of course from development and sometimes physical destruction related to development. And so we must also address these other drivers of biodiversity loss. And in fact, doing so is really helps us adapt to climate change by protecting these ecosystems that protect us and which help us adapt to climate change. So I think a strong part of the plan you mentioned, Vladimir, we have in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that Niall mentioned earlier. The whole framework is relevant to the oceans. During the negotiations, we heard many from the ocean community, the marine biodiversity community, saying, which are the targets on oceans? Well, all of them, right? Starting with target 1 on spatial planning, again, which you mentioned. We need to plan the whole ocean. Target 2 on ecosystem restoration. Often when we talk about ecosystem restoration, people are thinking of forests. We need to restore the oceans as well, the coasts, but also rebuilding fisheries. These are all important parts of ecosystem restoration. Of course, protected areas and the other targets of the framework, reducing pollution, preventing the introduction of invasive alien species. These are all key as well. So I think moving forward, of course, we also need to be able to engage all of the actors and listen to the voices of those that are most impacted. If we think again, for instance, of some of the things we need to do to address the biodiversity crisis in the ocean, it's one is controlling overfishing, but we really need to have that conversation closely with the fishing community or communities. We need to look at the importance of fishing and fisheries for livelihoods and make sure that we can work together. As we go forward now, as parties have the responsibility of translating the global goals and targets of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework into national targets, into developing their national biodiversity strategies and action plans, there's very strong opportunities to work with the ocean community, to work with the climate community, to get those linkages that Niall mentioned with NDCs, to make sure that we can really realize these synergies. The ocean issue, the climate issue, the biodiversity issue, it's actually one issue, and we need to look at them together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cooper, for those words, emphasizing what SIDS and others have always said this entire time, which is that everything is connected and we need to take action accordingly. I now invite Mr. Bryce Ruddick, legal advisor to the chair of AOSIS, for his remarks.
Thank you, Gemma. And I'm here today on behalf of Ambassador Fatoumata Latour, the chair of the Alliance of Small Island States, and he sends his regrets in not being able to join us. For those of you who don't know, AOSIS represents the 39 small island and low-lying developing states that are members of the United Nations or its associated entities. And of course, for small island states, the ocean is critical to our economies, society, culture, and indeed even our sovereignty. For many, the ocean is the primary connection with the rest of the world through trade and transport. It provides financial and non-financial resources for livelihoods and economies. It attracts tourism. It provides mineral resources, and potentially even through the potential of marine biological research, provides the opportunity to tackle diseases and, of course, potentially redefine life on Earth. And in this era of unprecedented and relentless sea level rise, the SIDS have been particularly engaged in discussions around sea level rise and international law, both here at the United Nations, here at the UNFCCC, and then back in New York at the United Nations. This past September, our AOSIS leaders issued a declaration sort of emphasizing that we remain particularly vulnerable to the multiple global crises and external shocks of the past few years. And these impacts on our societies and economies have not gone away. And as a result, we rely not on the generosity of other states, but actually on international law to secure our rights in this constantly changing world. And so the small islands have taken a whole number of steps to develop and interpret international law. And I want to just focus on sort of two areas today. So the first is about baselines and maritime zones, securing these as sea levels rise. And potentially unsurprisingly, we think that as sea levels rise, we should not lose maritime zones and any rights and entitlements that are as a result of those maritime zones should continue. And we're not alone in thinking this, and we don't just think it. This is our interpretation of international law. There are a number of other states who now also agree that this is a valid interpretation of international law, a reinterpretation in some sense of the obligations that are in UNCLOS. On the issue of statehood, we hear a lot that sea level rise poses an existential threat to small islands. And we should be, I think, really cautious about characterizing sea level rise as an existential threat to nations, particularly small islands. We must not conflate the reality of land territory disappearing or becoming uninhabitable with the legal rules concerning statehood and sovereignty, including the permanent sovereignty over our national resources. And on this latter point, we're sort of exceptionally clear. No matter the physical changes that are wrought by the climate crisis, we as small islands will remain sovereign states. Changes to our sovereignty will happen only when we as small islands exercise our rights to self-determination and choose another political entity to continue as. And finally, the ocean is a common asset that must benefit all equally. And as we start to implement the new BB&J agreement, we need to think about the benefits of these agreements through a lens of equity and justice. We have to ensure that the benefits that exist in the ocean are equally shared by all, and particularly those that are most vulnerable to these global crises in which we've had very little, we've caused very little of them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bryce, for those words. The small island states have been thought leaders, action leaders in the realm of international law and multilateralism, and it's really good to see that this leadership is continuing in conversations on sea level rise, but also in the advisory opinion initiatives that are currently underway at the ICJ and ITLOS. Last, but not the least at all, I invite Ambassador Aubrey Webson, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the Permanent Mission of Antigua and Barbuda to the UN, to make some remarks. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for making time for us today.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to, first of all, offer our appreciation to Vladimir for his leadership for the last several years, and trust that you will enjoy your retirement and that the oceans would be used plentifully by you in retirement. Colleagues, friends, I am sitting in for my minister who would have loved to have been here. And I am being asked to share some thoughts on this real important subject to Antigua and Barbuda and to all island nations. In 2015 in Paris, in the preamble, the question of oceans, as was noted, was there, and began the process to link that and to seek the nexus between oceans and climate change. In 2016, I attended a meeting in Rome, and one of my very strong observation and points raised had to do with the lack of discussion at that time on oceans as it related to both the SDGs and the climate nexus. Because I felt that for small islands, if you didn't discuss oceans, you are not getting to the heart of what is, for most of us, our survival. In 2021, in Glasgow, the question was raised and was able to be put onto the agenda on the Oceans Climate Nexus. And that began for us a major process. We saw, of course, this year, the BBMJ agreement, and the importance of that agreement to island nations cannot be understated. It is for us significant. As I sat and listened, I followed the discussion here, and I want to pick out three things. Firstly, the importance of the ocean to island nations and its linkages to life, to the terrestrial life on the land space of our countries. It is important because we talk about food and the importance of preserving the oceans for livelihood and for food to our countries or island nations. We know and what has happened in the past 20, 30, 40, 50 years in terms of the killing off of coral reefs and the killing off and the depletion of our fish stocks. And further, the invasion of invasive species into the oceanic waters of many small islands, and what that in itself has done to livelihood. We believe, therefore, the area of cooperation between larger nations or between all nations, let me say, is critical if we are to return to save the oceans for our nations. We are aware of the importance of the ocean within the atmospheric conditions of our climate, because we are aware of the actions taken last year in the proposals put forward in the agreements on CDBs around the carbonization within oceans. I want to also note in the area of development, because while we mention fisheries and we mention the ocean as a source of food, for many of us, the ocean is also a source of overall livelihood. Our development in many island nations is tourism, and we can't divorce the ocean's health from our tourism product. And it is important that that development mix be sought in cooperation, because our survival on tourism is critical. And therefore, it is important that that mix be in working together hand in hand with the international community, that while we enhance our tourism products for our development and survival in our nation, that we get the best science to help us in that area of our development. I want to shout out our colleagues from Dominica, who has recently sequestered a significant amount of ocean space for the blue whale, and just to show how our region in the Caribbean, we respect all life in the ocean and the importance of it in national development. 2 points that my colleague from AOSIS, I don't know if I should say former colleague, Bryce raised, and that I think is important here, very important. And one, firstly, as we look at the law of the sea and the use of that many of our nations, and linking it to sea level rise, many nations and island nations are concerned. And here is where international cooperation and international law have to protect our statehood, because we cannot lose territory simply because of something that we can't control. We have we're not responsible for. And the matter of sea level rise and nations or island nations losing territory must be considered now in significantly. It is important to us, and we must consider it in our discussions. The law must protect the culture and the nationhood of these small islands, regardless to the territory. And the boundaries must not be shifted just because sea level rise has eaten, or I shouldn't say eaten, have drowned some of our land. Also important for us, the use of the ocean as a public good, as in many of the discussions that are currently going on. And again, the space for small islands within that discussion is most important. My friends, for small island developing states, the ocean is an asset. It is an asset that we must protect. It is an asset that we believe we must continue to be supported by. Antigua and Barbuda in 2024 would be hosting the fourth SIDS conference. One of the outcomes of that conference is going to be a center of excellence. And in the areas of the center of excellence, we want to focus on things like the ocean. Antigua and Barbuda, with the new university opened there a few years ago, within the Caribbean, saw the blue economy as one of the major areas of Antigua's interest. And we will continue to push to develop that. But it is important that we develop the blue economy not to exploit the ocean, not to return to a new area of exploitation for mankind, but a new area that can see life on Earth is shared with the importance of life in the ocean. Because together we have to live on this Earth, and together the climate conditions that we strive to achieve for the best of our land must similarly be achieved for the best of our ocean. There is a lot more space, a lot more possibilities in the ocean, and there's a lot of us who depend on it fully. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Webson, for those very stirring remarks. Colleagues, our high-level panel must now retire. We will have Q&A at the very end of our panel sessions. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ambassador Webson.
Can I just say one thing? And that is really to to acknowledge the leadership of the small islands and through AOSIS and otherwise in this process, but also in the CBD process. I think we're all indebted to the small islands for the leadership in the ambition that we have in the Paris Agreement and for holding us all to account. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will, as our high-level panelists leave the stage, I now invite our first panel to the floor. Dr. Susan Gardner, Director of Ecosystems for UNEP, Ms. Siri Bune, from the head of the Global Maritime Crime Program, UNODC, and Mr. Rasul Samadov and Ms. Ulrike Gurin from UNESCO, Underwater Cultural Heritage. Please, if you can take your seats. Colleagues, we are running short on time, so I will be asking you to keep very strictly to your time limits. I am not afraid to ask you to wrap up when you're running out of time. So without further ado, Dr. Susan Gardner, I give the floor to you.
Well, thank you so much, and there have been so many important points that have been made already that it allows a number of us to stick straight to the topics at hand. I mean, myself, I'm standing here in front of you to represent UNEP, but also as a person who has dedicated her career to marine science, to work on oceans, and to bringing scuba diving and the love of ocean to my family. And yet, when it comes to thinking about the state of the ocean, yes, there is a lot to worry about. Yes, there are a lot of challenges, but I also stand still full of hope. And this is because we have this growing recognition, like we heard in the previous panel, that the blue ecosystems are so powerful as nature-based solutions. And that's going to be the focus of what I want to talk about in the time that I have today. We saw in the 2023 UNEP emissions gap report that it's very clear that we require massive and urgent shift to bring down greenhouse gas emissions. Nature-based solutions are essential for this. And they provide about 1/3 of the climate benefits needed to meet the Paris Agreement, while also providing, as you heard before, clear adaptation and biodiversity benefits. Blue nature-based solutions are especially powerful. Mangroves alone sequester 4 times more carbon than terrestrial forests, all combined, all of them combined. You heard already about the importance of coral reefs as natural barriers, absorbing as much as 97% of wave energy. So this is enormous in terms of protecting local communities, coastal cities, from the devastation of economic collapse due to extreme weather events, as well as loss of infrastructure, homes, properties, lives. And when we look to achieve the full benefits of nature-based solutions, we know that it requires investing urgently, significantly, but also making the right kinds of investments. At the recent UN Environment Assembly, member states agreed to a resolution that finally establishes a universally defined definition of nature-based solutions, where we're investing in nature is for sustainable development, providing benefits for people, for climate, and for biodiversity. And this resolution also asks UNEP to convene consultations so that we can identify some really good solutions and best practices. And over the last year, there has been the whole series of consultations with great engagement from member states under the leadership of Costa Rica and Nigeria to highlight how you do this exactly, with the transparency and integrity that it requires, with social inclusion, engaging indigenous groups and youth. These have been brought out very clearly in the discussions of these consultations. And this brings me to my next point, that if we're going to do this correctly, it means we need to do it together. The Secretary General has called for networked and inclusive multilateralism as part of our common agenda. And he described intense cooperation between agencies, not dabbling, but intense cooperation, and deeper engagement across all the sectors of society, along the lines of what we just heard from David Cooper about the whole of society approach that's essential for implementing the Global Biodiversity Framework. Now, working across all the UN agencies, it takes a lot of effort. We're all learning this. But earlier this week, agency leaders came together as part of the UN Environmental Management Group and reiterated their commitment to this. And I think Valerie Hickey said it best when she said, when we compete rather than collaborate, the results of our efforts are less than the sum of our parts. And she's right. The UN Common Approach on Biodiversity and Nature-Based Solution provides a framework for the UN system to come together. And one of the objectives of this is just to ensure that everyone has an understanding of how biodiversity is essential to the mandate of all UN agencies. Whether your mandate in your agency is children or women or humanitarian assistance or providing food or peacekeeping, we all have a role to play in terms of protecting biodiversity to achieve our mandates. And just recently at the EU-UN meeting on prevention and stabilization and peacekeeping that I attended in Brussels, all the agencies at the table recognize that climate change is impacting their ability to achieve their mandates. But it was UNEP that came to the table to bring into the discussion and highlight the value of ecosystems, in particular for conflict-vulnerable communities. So in my experience in working with UN country teams, coastal ones as well as landlocked ones, they have a strong understanding of the need to invest in nature-based solutions, including blue solutions. And there's a lot of interest to lean into biodiversity as essential to their mandates. And there's a huge appetite to know how to do this correctly. And that's my final point. We do know how to do this. We have solutions. We have the science. We can deliver the opportunities that nature-based solutions, blue nature-based solutions provide. Over the weekend, we launched the Coral Reef Breakthrough, which is one of the 2030 breakthroughs that are advanced by the UN climate change high-level champions. And it establishes concrete global targets to prevent the extinctions of coral reefs. The breakthroughs identify where further collaboration is needed. They put science at the foundation of action, and they establish an accountability framework so that we're tracking progress transparently towards our goals. Others have mentioned the UN Decade on Ocean Science. I'll mention the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration that UNEP and FAO have championed together, and making extraordinary progress to heal our planet, to reverse the damage that we've done to nature because of our ignorance, because of our lack of understanding of the economic and social value of ecosystems. And these restoration, for example, we have restoration flagships as part of the SIDS restoration flagship. Vanuatu is recovering its mangroves and ensuring that marine protected areas are effective. In closing, in the words of the French President Macron just last week at the World Climate Action Summit, he said, "We need concrete solutions and commitments to enhance the power of our ocean to fight climate change." And this statement was part of the announcement for the UN Ocean Conference in 2025. This conference is a golden moment to demonstrate impact that can be achieved when the UN system and member states and whole of societies are all pulling together. When we work together, when we work smartly, we can elevate nature as a unifying and essential component of all of our toolboxes to support the urgent and effective climate action that we need right away. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gardner. I now give the floor to Ms. Bune.
Thank you very much, and thanks a lot for inviting UNODC and the Global Maritime Crime Program to this panel. UNODC is currently in the process of becoming a member to the UN Oceans, and we're very pleased to be collaborating with UN partners in this important event to bring the oceans agenda closer to discussions on improving efforts for climate adaptation and mitigation. So what does the UNODC and specifically to the Global Maritime Crime Program do that contributes to this? We actively support member states in preventing and responding to crimes impacting oceans and marine ecosystems, including by tackling specifically illegal fishing, crimes in the fisheries sector, pollution at sea, and violation of marine protected areas. The Global Maritime Crime Programme's mission is to improve the capabilities of member states' criminal justice system to prevent, interdict, investigate, and prosecute maritime crimes through a sound rule of law framework and effective international cooperation. I would like to highlight that state parties to the UN Convention on Transnational Organized Crime, to which UNODC is the secretariat, have adopted critical resolutions to confront crimes that affect the marine environment. Also, there's a linkage between the criminal justice, anti-corruption measures, and crimes that affect marine ecosystems, which has already become an integral part and aspect of the UN common approach to biodiversity. So what do we mean by enhancing maritime law enforcement to strengthen ocean climate action? First, I would like to highlight that a significant gap exists regarding the role of maritime law enforcement agencies in current approaches to ocean conservation and the blue economy. Further, in achieving a healthy and productive ocean, it's unattainable without sufficient ocean governance. Also, while there is progress in formulating new treaties and regulations to safeguard our ocean, I would like to highlight the challenges faced by maritime law enforcement agencies in keeping the pace, as well as lacking the necessary capacity and resources to enforce these regulations effectively. Then again, why it is important, and this has been mentioned already in previous speakers, but I would like to highlight the Paris Agreement recognizes the significance of oceans and coastal ecosystems in both mitigating and adapting to climate change. Nevertheless, discussions within the UNFCCCs often neglect this essential ocean crime climate nexus and the role of maritime law enforcement in strengthening ocean climate action, which is often overlooked. Also, as was previously mentioned, 2030 targets outlined in the Kunming-Montreal Global Diversity Framework translate to a need for enhanced enforcement at sea, and particularly concerning MPAs, and countries aim to step up their conservation efforts. However, despite covering 7% of oceans as of 2021, the MPA's effectiveness remains compromised without effective monitoring and robust law enforcement agencies, especially against organized crime in the fisheries sector. The destruction, exploitation, and degradation resulting from illegal and criminal activities at sea are key drivers of marine biodiversity loss. Also, this exploitation contributes to biodiversity loss and climate change by damaging blue crimes affecting marine ecosystems, biodiversity loss, and climate change. Some of the papers I would like to highlight the UNODC and the WWF last year developed an analysis paper which was launched at COP27, exploring the nexus between crimes affecting marine ecosystems, biodiversity loss, and climate change. Some of the paper's tangible recommendations looked at integrating law enforcement and the criminal justice system into conservation and climate action efforts, including encouraging more dialogue and cross-pollination between criminal justice actors and ocean science climate experts. So how can UNODC and the Global Maritime Crime Programme contribute to this? We would like to promote rule-based ocean climate action and support UN ocean partners in implementing ocean solutions to address climate change. As first line of defense for our oceans against criminality and exploitation, UNODC is equipping and empowering maritime law enforcement agencies and personnel around the world to face crimes that affect the marine environment. Also, UNODC developed guidelines and guidance for crime scene first responders, for investigators and prosecutors, and mutual legal assistance on crimes that affect marine ecosystems. UNODC is also a partner of the International Initiative of Law Enforcement for Climate, launched yesterday, at the UEA COP28 presidency, which was a separate event. And UNODC also extends legal support to address environmental issues regarding environmental disasters such as oil spills, ensuring legal remedies, and that justice prevail in such incidents. Going back to the partnership with WWF, we have a pilot project in Ecuador to advance in innovative knowledge sharing and collaborative maritime security for tackling crimes in the fisheries sector and strengthening marine conservation initiatives in the Galapagos. I'm very soon concluding. The global effort for ocean climate action and reducing marine biodiversity loss face great hindrances due to criminality and illicit activities. Therefore, in conclusion, any successful ocean-related outcome of the COP28 necessitates scaling up initiatives against crimes impacting the marine environment and aligning justice system responses with nature-based solutions, biodiversity, climate, and ocean agendas through a cohesive approach, intertwining collaborative partnerships, innovation, and capacity building initiatives. I thank you.
Thank you so much. I now hand the floor to Ms. Gurin from UNESCO, World Cultural Heritage. Thank you.
Yeah. Could you please put the PowerPoint on? Thank you. I just thought I'd bring you some decoration to the room because I'm talking about a topic that has been very much absent over the last years in ocean discussions, while it's very much in synergy with what you do. And that is actually talking about underwater culture heritage. The ocean is not only biodiversity, it's also our own identity. It's the traces of what we were. And maybe also what we will be, because there is quite a lot of information out there that is touching on climate change. I go over here because then I can see what I show you. You see certainly that a very large part of our underwater and our coastal heritage will go underwater, has already been swallowed by the water, and this is an ongoing process. Not today, not only yesterday, it's millennia that have actually swallowed places where people lived. 90% of the development of humanity was basically, done through a time when the ocean was much, much lower. So we have a lot of data in these places that can inform your decisions for the future. And we think that is important. And of course, those sites are closely intertwined with biodiversity. Mostly they are fish breeding sites. So we shouldn't too fast say there is no connection. There is a very close connection. And I'm representing here UNESCO Culture Sector, but also Scripps Institute, NYU University, CIA heritage activities. There's really a big network out there that is working on that and that is very much concerned about the cultural heritage that we're losing to climate change. Right? And this is actually millions of sites. I can give you just some short examples. You see here a World Heritage Site of Kilwa Kusini in Tanzania. You see that the corner of the fortress is already missing. You see Herculaneum in Italy, where the groundwater is rising because the seawater is rising. You see Alexandria, Kiteby Fortress, where wave breakers were put on the place trying to protect the fortress, while actually one of the 7 wonders of the world, the Alexandria Pharos, is lying under that. So we see this is a real issue and we have to raise our voice. It's like, please connect and please do not only always look at biodiversity, that is of course very important to us as well, but also see the cultural part of it. And of course there is, especially for states, a huge importance for tourism as well. These sites are really, really attractive, and I wanted to show you these pictures that you see. I mean, it's quite, a touching story to see that people have been living at these areas and left their traces. And we can only say, please, with us, become aware of the importance of cultural heritage that is lying at the coast or lying close to the coast underwater, and that it is very much impacted. We have to call on you to help us predict the sea level rise and how it's going forward. There are some places where we're already looking very much into the detail. Venice, for instance, we know that we are losing this city. But we have to inventory all cultural heritage sites. And there are many, many that are in the sediments, especially prehistoric sites that are washed away while the ocean rises, and the waves come more and more, cribbling this away. And when we do this, and when we know what's happening, then we have to build and test mitigation measures together with you. As I said, when you look at this here, this is Alexandria. I take this because it's a really important site, one of the 7 wonders of the world. You see how this will look in the future. We know that there will be many, many, many sites that will go underwater, and there are many, many important sites under the water. We also have here, for instance, the house of Christopher Columbus in La Isabela in Dominican Republic. You see that half of it's already missing. It's going into the ocean. And we have something to do about it, but we have to do it with competence, with looking also in what the archaeologists can tell us what is lying under the water. There is a whole fleet of Christopher Columbus lying just in front of this house. We might protect the house, but we shouldn't do this in building something over the fleet. And this is not only important for culture, it's also important for biodiversity. So let's connect, let's include cultural heritage in the marine protected areas and in marine spatial planning as well. That is important. We have quite a network at UNESCO. We have a scientific advisory body, field offices, state parties, accredited NGOs, universities, chairs. It's really a network. We can tell you what's happening and who is who in the international community. Our convention, and that is more for the law enforcers, covers actually all waters, means also the international waters. We have had already now projects where we tried and have protected sites in international waters. There is an enforcement system in the 2001 Convention. The 2001 Convention of UNESCO is in force. We are working very much with Carabinieri, coastal guards, Guardia from Spain, with all the coastal services to protect the underwater heritage, but we would love to hook up also to all the initiatives you do on that. There's a lot of treasure hunting going on, unfortunately, right? Underwater cultural heritage, you think of the shipwreck treasure, but I think it might still hide the key to understanding the origin of humanity, and I think that is important. I know that I have short time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to this panel. We are very appreciative. To be fair to our next panel, I will ask you to vacate, and for the new panel to come up, I invite Ms. Tarubari, Mr. Gabriel Muswali, who may or may not be here with us. Muswali? That's okay. Ms. Jana Friedrich and Dr. Bebehani, and Ms. Regina Asiotis and Mr. Crispin Duvern, please come to the floor. In the hope that we will have time for Q&A later, we'll just go straight in. Ms. Bari, please. Fisheries Resources Officer, FAO, and Fisheries and Aquaculture Division, in conversation with Mr. Muswali, who unfortunately can't join us today. Please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Gemma. Nice to be here, and many thanks for the invitation. So in the interest of time, I'll just go through my slides rather quickly. But it might also be restful for the audience who has been listening very carefully to the speeches so far. So I'll talk about aquatic food systems. I'm from the Food and Agriculture Organization, Fisheries and Aquaculture Division, working on climate change, and we have a whole team involved in climate change related activities. So the mandate of the organization is to look specifically into food security. So there is this very sad figure that I would like to start my presentation with, is that there's an estimated 735 million people who have faced hunger in 2022. So the COVID crisis has made this figure a little bit worse and has actually erased a lot of efforts that have been done throughout the decades. So hunger is still on the rise in Western Asia, in the Caribbean, and in all subregions of Africa. And the current projections indicate that 600 million people will be chronically undernourished in 2030. And as of today, 3 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet, which is really a dire figure. So the aquatic food in this picture and how it can contribute to food security, actually the figures tell us that if you look at the green bar here, which is the consumption, the rate of growth in fish protein consumption has outpaced the rate of growth of all the other fish sources. And it is growing twice as much as the growth rate of human population, which is the dashed column here. So this is a figure that we cannot ignore. The consumption is steadily growing, and it has a great potential to address food security issues. But also in terms of climate action, it can contribute to climate action. If you look at the conversion efficiency, which is the graph in the middle, which is basically how much feed you need to produce 1 kilo of live weight. You see that aquaculture, so for fisheries is none because it's based on wild resources. But for aquaculture, you can see that it requires the least amount of feed compared to other sources of other type of meat. And in terms of greenhouse gas emissions intensity, fisheries and aquaculture are also among the lowest emitters in terms of production compared to other sources, more or less at the same level than eggs and milk. So Niall has referred to the Ocean Dialogue earlier. So there was this Ocean Dialogue in June 2023 that focused on 2 topics. One was coastal ecosystem restoration, including blue carbon, and the other one was fisheries and food security. And state and non-state actors were invited to contribute case studies to illustrate how they are addressing climate change into the aquatic food sector. And the figure showed here summarizes the topics that were of the case studies that were submitted. So over half of them were cross-cutting, 30%, more than 30% were on fisheries, 9% on aquaculture, and 8% on value chains. So the key messages that came out of the Ocean Dialogue are summarized here in 3 bullet points. The first one is the need for integration of aquatic food climate solution within national processes, including under the UNFCCC, and to link national climate policies and aquatic food production, which is currently not the case because it's often a forgotten sector. The second point is that it is vital that fish are managed using an ecosystem approach. So it's also necessary to better recognize the role of aquatic food in the carbon sector and for food security. And the third bullet is about decarbonizing the entire value chain of aquatic food production, including fishing vessels and aquaculture practices. So whereas the aquatic food is a minor emitter of greenhouse gases, there is room for reducing those emissions. So the science is quite clear on the fact that the negative impacts on ocean, and I think it has been referred to quite broadly this morning. But there is still a high level of uncertainty as to what those impacts are and how they can be quantified. So this is the reason why FAO has engaged with a network of modelers that are looking into improving the accuracy of climate projections on here, the graphs that are shown here, on the change in exploitable animal biomass in the oceans. So based on different climate scenarios, they're trying to see how, to make these projections more accurate so that responses can be designed better. And responses, of course, deal with a number of issues or areas, institutions, management systems, markets, consumers, and so on. So I'm finishing just to say that to address those impacts, there's a framework that has been adopted within FAO, which is referred to as the Blue Transformation, that aims at transforming the way aquatic food systems are producing and are managed, so that we can better address the food crisis and the climate crisis at the same time. So it's 3 main objectives. One is about increasing sustainably aquaculture production. The second one is effectively managing the fisheries resources. And the third one is about upgrading value chains, mainly to make them more effective and minimize losses. And I think I will just skip this one, given that I'm running out of time, just to mention that there is a whole set of guidance document that FAO has produced on management, on economics of adaptation, on renewable energy use in small-scale fisheries, and so on, and that there is a field program on adaptation. This is the map that you can see here with all these orange dots that are the current projects ongoing, funded by different types of donors. Thank you for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bari. I now hand the floor to Ms. Friedrich, and just to note, it appears that all of our panelists on this session were supposed to be paired with another, so perhaps after you complete your interventions, you can have conversations with each other for the benefit of the audience. Ms. Friedrich, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Jana Friedrich. I'm from the International Atomic Energy Agency, and actually we are operating the only marine research laboratory in the whole UN system. And we are based in Monaco, and our lab is about 52 persons of staff, including administration. So that's not a lot. So in doing our work, we are relying on collaboration and on coordination, which is this event about. And how do we do this? For example, we collaborate with, we have a tool that we use that is called collaborating centers. And one of our specialized collaborating centers is the Kuwait Institute of Scientific Research. My intention was today to have a dialogue with one of our collaborators, Ms. Montaha Behbehani. Unfortunately, she is holed up in another event, so you have to bear with me. So we are collaborating with KISR, the Kuwait Institute, in many fields of activity. One is ocean acidification. And especially the Gulf is quite sensitive to ocean acidification. It's a quite hot area. It has coral reefs. So, and KISR has huge also experimental facilities. So in our work on ocean acidification, KISR helps us with the experimental facilities to make experimental work on the impact of ocean acidification on marine ecosystems, on organisms, but also on the potential impacts on measures against ocean acidification, like alkalinization, addition of alkalinization to the ocean. So this is one example. The International Atomic Energy Agency is also the host of the Ocean Acidification International Coordination Center. And this coordination center was launched at the Rio +20 conference in 2012. And since then, we are operating it, also thanks to the continuous funding support from the US. And in this so-called OICC, we are collaborating with other UN agencies, like, for example, IOC UNESCO. And this morning we had a dialogue in a program where also IOC UNESCO and IAEA is part of, that is the Ocean Acidification Research for Sustainability. And in this dialogue, we had 2 strands of conversation. So how we improve the capabilities of member states to do monitoring and reporting on the indicator of SDG 14.3.1, so to measuring really pH, so that we are able to better assess the extent of ocean acidification. And the other stand was how to enhance and mainstream ocean acidification knowledge in climate change action. And one of the major outcomes was that you have to do not just education and training, which IAEA is doing with member states in order to enable them to do the monitoring, but also our colleague Steve Widdicombe from PML had a great idea. We should educate policymakers so that policymakers can talk to other policymakers how important it is to tackle ocean acidification, and also to educate journalists about ocean acidification, but not in isolation, just ocean acidification, but also in the context of eutrophication, which is also impacting ocean acidification. Blue carbon, restoration of coastal ecosystems like seagrass, mangroves that counteract ocean acidification, and to communicate the mutual benefits that all these measures have and that people can do in their regions something about ocean acidification. And I would like to leave it at that and hand back to the moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Friedrich. Crispin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good day, everyone. I am Crispin Deverne. I am Program Director for Climate and Disaster Resilience at the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, or OECS, which is an 11-member grouping of island states dedicated to regional integration and cooperation. And I'm planning to talk today about the whole idea of the vulnerability of our critical port infrastructure in island states and certainly in the Eastern Caribbean. Now, in 2015-16, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, led an assessment of ports in island states in the Caribbean. And one of the case studies was done for St. Lucia. It showed that our ports were vulnerable to climate change, to sea level rise, among others, extreme events, flooding, and so on. Now, obviously, seaports, being by virtue of their location, are vulnerable to sea level rise. But it turns out that our airports are also vulnerable because out of our 25 thereabouts airports and 25 seaports, roughly, in the Eastern Caribbean, that's 11 member states, most of the airports are also located at sea level and close to the coast. And so one of them, for example, in St. Lucia, where I'm from, one of the two airports, the main international airport, is going to lose about 150 meters of runway by 2100 thereabouts. And so that's the kind of impact we're talking about. We experienced in 2017 3 Category 5 hurricanes within a space of a week or two. And in the situation of Dominica, just to give Dominica as an example, people having their homes destroyed, their businesses destroyed, they were unable to leave Dominica for days on end because the ports were wrecked. Both the airports and seaports were either destroyed or severely damaged by wave action, storm surge, or by flooding. The airport was unusable because it's covered with silt from nearby rivers as well as from the hinterland. So these are the kind of impacts that we are facing. And as you heard from previous speakers, our airports and seaports, they are our connection to the world. We don't have the benefit of having, supplies brought in from overland from another country. We don't have that, not in a continental situation. We're dealing with, these isolated countries who rely on ports for air and seaports for movement of people, movement of goods, and so on. And of course, we are heavily dependent on tourism, as you heard earlier. So these assets, these critical assets, so we have to do something to ensure that that they are fit for purpose no matter what happens. And so looking at some of the impacts we've already experienced, I think for us it is critical that we begin to expand the work that was done by UNCTAD do assessments for more countries, for more islands, on an individual basis. So if we can get the projections, say, for Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, and so on. So the planners who are planning the expansion or the upgrading of their ports can make the right judgments and decide, what kind of adjustments need to be made so that these ports can withstand the intensified hurricanes, intensifying floods, and so on. So having access to the kind of data and information which is needed for planning is critical. But more than that, we also need to do the planning on a not just looking at the ports individually, but on a network basis, because it is not uncommon for one weather event to knock out 2 or 3 countries overnight. So you can have, or within one hurricane, that is, one system, to knock out more than one country. Okay, so you can get a hurricane moving from St. Lucia, then hitting Martinique or Dominica higher up the chain as it goes along. And so where you thought you were going to get your relief supplies from, or move people to, it's also been compromised, so you can't move. Okay. We also have the reality that if a Miami is hit, and Miami is one of our main supply ports, right, for transshipment into the region, if that's hit, okay, and then we're in an even more dire situation. So, in fulfilling, for example, one of the mandates of our climate change adaptation strategy and action plan, we need to have that data and information ready. We need to look at the networks and look at it from a networking basis, and we need to build capacity to ensure that our planners, our port managers, and so on are trained to manage ports in a changing world, to plan them for a changing world, and also to make sure that our ports are run in a way where they don't compromise the ecosystems which help to protect them. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. DeVerne, and we are very, the information that you provided on the vulnerability of SIDS to very simple natural disasters is really important. I now hand the floor to Ms. Regina from UNCTAD. We are very close to time. I will ask you to be brief. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me? Yes. I know we have run out of time, and Crispin has said it all. Thank you very much. Just maybe to add, we've been working for many years. There's a time lag. We've been working for very many years on issues related to that, and we've done this with a lot of international organizations, regional partners, scientists, universities, and industry, and we hope to continue that. There's an increasing urgency of action because a lot of, as Crispin explained, a lot of critical coastal transport infrastructure assets in small island developing states are at high and growing risk from as early as 2030, so it's no time to lose. I will leave it here because I do know we have run out of time. Thank you very much indeed. Goodbye.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have 20 seconds left. I will attempt to wrap up. Earlier in the high-level panel, we heard from high-level SIDS representatives on the why we are here, why we need ocean action, and why that's important for climate action. And the strong message was that equity is a key role. We heard from various UN bodies. We are very excited about all the new projects that are forthcoming and also the opportunities that the UN Oceans Dialogue can present for all of us. Thank you so much for your time.